This is the Skin Science Podcast. I'm Dr. Thomas Hitchcock, and here we'll investigate everything skin science and dissect it from a scientific perspective, analyze it from a medical perspective, critique it from a consumer perspective, and give insight from an industry perspective.
Hello everyone, I am Dr. Thomas Hitchcock and welcome back to the Skin Science Podcast. And with us in the studio, we have Angela Wilson McDonald. How are you doing, Angela Wilson
great.
McDonald?
Nice to see you, Thomas.
When can I start calling you Angela Wilson?
I don't, who knows? Who knows?
Angela Wilson
I like
Skin
to keep
Pen.
them guessing. Yeah, I like to keep them guessing.
All right, and also we have, again, for the second podcast in a row, we have David Weir. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
All right, and I don't have your thing but I'm gonna basically wing it. So that David has been working for over 22 years in the space of aesthetic medicine, and he is a nurse practitioner with a master's degree in nursing from
Chamberlain was actually where I got my master's.
Chamberlain, okay. And so very interestingly, he went to Texas Women's
University. Mm-hmm.
University,
Yep.
which was, it sounds like a women's university, but it's not. It's co-ed. It used to be women's. And I thought that was an interesting little fact. And it turned out it was convenience that led you to...
And it was one of the top three
Top
nursing
three.
It's like in the top 5
the
programs
closest
in the US.
top
yeah.
three to his house.
Yes.
No, which frankly, that's the smart thing to do, as commute is horrible. But anyway, in the peanut gallery, we have Dr. Jose Maldonado, Seti, and Alan, the producers. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing great. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm better because science is a puzzle, and today I brought this puzzle. This is called the Pachenko box. And this is by a famous, I don't think I've shown this one before, but it's by a famous puzzle creator named Will Strebos. It's like there's a J in there somewhere. It's a name that I'm not good at pronouncing. And so I haven't not actually solved this yet. So I still have to solve this because it's kind of a one you got to sit for a long time and figure out. But this is one, it costs quite a bit of money. But a puzzle collector, any puzzle collector worth his salt probably has one of these. So
Speaking of solving puzzles,
you did not solve that.
I believe there was a challenge
in the
last podcast.
I believe our guest solved it, not you.
I don't recall. All I know is I've got a pyramid in front of me.
I don't remember either.
Thank you, David.
Well, we're not going to let Angela get away with that. Anyhow, so today we wanted to talk about exosomes. Mm-hmm. And so we've talked about it already, I think, a couple times. And the reason why we've talked about it lately a couple times is because it is a kind of hot buzzword in the aesthetics industry. And unfortunately, it seems like the news is moving faster than the actual science.
Oh, yeah.
And I find it's a problem, and the FDA has said it's a problem. The real question is, who is doing what they need to do to actually make this a real legitimate thing? Is there enough evidence out there already? How comfortable are you as a clinician? Because frankly, I think this is one of those topics where it could turn out to be benign, but it could also turn out that we're doing harm because we just don't know enough yet. And the real question is, when is the right time to move into this field, given all of the kind of controversy around it? And is everybody aware of the controversy? So let's start there. David, from your perspective, what's the situation with exosomes?
We'll go with resurgence.
Okay.
Because exosomes were a hot buzzword about 6 years ago. They were dozens of companies launching, everyone coming out, everyone creating exosomes, all these proven claims were being thrown around at how they're the next big thing on anti-aging. And it was about 5 years ago that the FDA shut them all down. And it was because there was a lot of variability in sourcing, there was a lot of variability in the end product, there was a lot of variability of where you were getting the exosomes. Were they, platelet derived? Were they mesenchymal stem cell derived? I mean, there was a lot of different things happening with exosomes, and no one was really controlling it. And the FDA really didn't want to control it, but the FDA had the foresight to say, this could be dangerous. So they just kind of wiped the slate clean. And it was maybe 2 years ago that they started making another resurgence. And the new resurgence has been, I would say, the more reputable exosome companies are focusing on the fact that it's an exosome, how they're producing it, how they're getting it, how to store it, how many exosomes you get. That's it. They're not making any claims on what those exosomes do, what they do in aesthetics. Now, there are a couple people that don't quite understand the legality of making a false claim that will say it does this. But in my experience looking at the literature, there's no actual human trials where we're using exosomes for aesthetics, specifically in my realm of what I do. So the claim, I say resurgence just because there's more and more companies coming out and they're really marketing, how many exosomes they have. But what does that translate to us as practitioners, or what does that translate to the patient on how it's going to benefit them? The short answer is we don't know yet.
And I think many of us that have been in the industry for a while have observed that there's these micro trends that happen. They all follow suit and they fall away, and it's not always the best trends, And so I'm not sure if you have a...
Well, I would just say, the layest device, the latest treatment, the latest trend isn't necessarily the best thing. I would say the majority of everything I do in my practice is well vetted by science, well vetted by data. There's tons of R&D, clinical trials based around everything that I do.
You have a list here that you put of research that's been done with exosomes, and you made a comment when we were getting ready to start taping. Yeah. Could you repeat that comment about what you found when you did the search?
Yeah, so there is quite a few publications over the past several years about the use of exosomes. Okay, there's quite a few ongoing studies happening right now about the use of exosomes. The thing is that these are non-human trials. So these are either done on human skin that is outside of the body in like a petri dish. They're done in a petri dish alone, or they're done on animals. So there's a lot of theoretical evidence that exosomes may aid in wound repair or scar repair or healing or promotion of hair follicles, promotion of the things we want in our skin like collagen, elastin, and fibroblast production. So theoretically, there's a lot of soft data out there, but there's no hard data, full-on clinical trials that I'm aware of using these products in an injectable way.
Right.
There are some topical studies happening that do show promise, but a lot of the topical studies with exosomes, not a lot, all of the topical studies with exosomes, say like there's a difference, but all the studies with exosomes, to my knowledge, are based on patient-reported outcomes. So,
which could be placebo.
Yeah. So patient-reported outcomes are great. They're claims like my skin
feels smoother,
or looks better, or my hair appears fuller. But they're not actual medical claims of saying, injecting this product causes, an increase in, the hair follicular stages and changing to from dormant to resting to growing. I mean,
we're actually measuring the thickness.
Yeah, or measuring the thickness or the number of hair follicles per centimeter squared. There's not a lot of hard data out there, and that's one way that exosomes have kind of been able to make some claims around patient-reported outcomes.
Yeah.
Okay. But scientifically, are there histology, or are we doing punch biopsies and looking what's happening to the skin underneath these topically applied products? There's no published data that I know of.
Right.
So, there's ways to make it sound like it's the best thing, but there's not a lot of true hard substantiated it's science behind it.
No, I agree with you, and I'm the first person to to be excited about anything when it comes to trying to innovate and bring science forward and how we can do things better. But just like the way I felt about the growth factor story back, is still persisting, but now all these growth factor companies are saying, oh, it was never the growth factor, it was always the exosomes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, BS. I call BS. But what I would say is, it doesn't really change a lot, because topically when you place an exosome on, what's the difference between putting a growth factor in your skin and an exosome with a growth factor in it? And then maybe there's some DNA in there, but is that going to get past the stratum corneum any differently? And so unless you substantiate that it does, I'm going to say, why does it matter?
Right. I
You
know.
know?
I mean, there is a product out of the Mayo Clinic that I do carry. It's a topical exosome product. As far as my clients, excellent patient-reported outcomes. They did do some histology of what happens to the collagen when it's applied topically, and there's some promise to it. Don't get me wrong, but again, there's no long-term safety on a lot of these things. There's no, like, if you're putting exosomes on your skin every day, what happens in 5 years? What happens in 10 years?
It's true.
If you're
I feel the same way about retinoids, though.
Yeah.
It's that I think that's the biggest kind of question here is, again, we talked about this on our last podcast, that it's about dosage, right? Dosage is important because the body reacts to things in dose. If you take a whole bottle of aspirin, you'll die. If you take one aspirin, it won't do much.
Right.
And so it's or it might help you, it might get rid of your headache, or keep you from getting an embolism or something like that. But the fact is that we are, in my opinion, being slightly irresponsible to say, flood yourself with these exosomes, which, by the way, the industry is using like the word Kleenex, like an exosome's an exosome. The real thing I think that is on people like us in this room is to make sure that when we speak about these things, we don't pretend like they're a generic. When we say I use this product, it's because this is the source it's from. That's why I feel like it's, appropriate. This is, there may not be all the research done, but you said all the right things, because basically you're saying I can't promise it's going to do miracles because I'm not even sure how it really works yet, because they haven't done enough, but they've done enough to convince me that it's worth recommending, but at some point you might say, I might stop recommending it because, and I'm not saying you should, or I'm not trying to disparage any company, but the fact is, there was a time when we treated acne with x-rays and it worked, but they stopped doing it because it caused cancer, and so that's the thing is, we are always learning. Medicine and science is moving forward. We don't always know everything up front. So we might find out that adding copious amounts of these signals is a good thing if it's on one cell source, but it's a bad thing if it's on another cell source. The good thing about the platelet-derived exosomes, or I would say blood-derived, maybe more than platelets, it depends on, I guess, how they're manufacturing them, is that they're circulating in the blood already. The question is, how much are they concentrating them? Because frankly, if you take 15 cc of blood, there are already trillions of exosomes just floating around. The fact is the body produces these signals in certain amounts for a reason. It's on us to figure out what that reason is so that we can know how to use those things. And that, to me, is the whole focus of what our conversation is today and what we should be doing and shouldn't be doing, when we can move forward, et cetera. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things that you can't just jump on it because everyone's doing it. I think we still need to be, I'm going to use the word cautiously optimistic.
Sure.
Like, I really want the next thing in aesthetics to happen. I want,
Progression of science.
Progression of science.
Right.
I want us to push the envelope, but not push it to the point of risking patient safety.
Right.
So I've been very timid. I mean, again, I had exosome vendors beating down my door 5-6 years ago, and I turned them all away because there was no data. I had someone beat down my door about 2 years ago, and I was like, well, there's a little more data now, so I'll explore it. But I'm not jumping in, head first into a shallow pool. I want to make sure that it's still safe for everyone to actually, for all my patients.
Right. And I'm hoping that most healthcare providers are using a similar tactic. But it's obvious that not all are, because there are some of these companies that are selling and people are buying. So one of the other things is looking at things like commodities and then trying to find the cheapest source. That's an issue too, because generics aren't always the same as name brands, even when it comes to drugs. That's a huge issue as far as like that's concerned. So But when it comes to the exosomes, I do want to talk a little bit about the cell sources and what your understanding is, because you said you there's one that you in particular like. I don't really want to get into too much of that because I don't want to get you in trouble at all. But I do want to talk about the different cell sources and whether or not that makes a difference. Is it less compelling, more compelling based on the cell source? Is there not enough information to tell yet? Because my feeling is, of the studies that you did, you said a lot of them were on wound healing.
Wound healing, yeah.
Which makes sense if you're using, like, even in the blood is kind of ready to heal a wound because it wants to say, if I get cut, I want to have a clotting cascade. Then I also probably have these exosomes to initiate certain, things after that cascade. So it makes a lot of sense that I think there was a company that just got a wound healing indication for PRP or something like that, and it's because in blood there are wound healing things, which is different than something like a liver stem cell. Like liver stem cells are made to make liver cells, which are hepatocytes, which do very different things than what a white blood cell does or a red blood cell does. So, in your mind, does all that matter? Is it just not enough information, or is it too much information?
I think the most compelling evidence in the literature tends to support either blood-derived exosomes or adipose tissue-derived exosomes or mesenchymal stem cells. And what I've read. Now, you can get exosomes from anywhere in the body. And a lot of these companies actually use donor exosomes. So another thing you have to kind of figure out is, like, where did those donor exosomes come from? I used to... one of the companies, and I know I'm not going to name names, I brought on briefly about 5 years ago, and I tried it on a couple patients. The results were okay. Was it better than my traditional PRP? Because I've been using PRP for a while. Not really. And PRP to me was autologous, so it's, you can't have a reaction to your own blood. So I was like, PRP.
Well.
I mean, I guess you could. You could have a reaction depending on how it's
less likely you're going to have an issue.
It's less likely that you'll have an issue. And I found that they were sourcing them, and it was placental derived. And they basically had like a...
Hopefully human placenta.
A human placenta derived. But they would get all these donor placentas and, for lack of better words, put them in a giant blender and give you this like mixed slurry
oh, geez.
Of placental-derived stem cells. Now, of course, they tested them for all the bloodborne pathogens and whatnot, so they were deemed safe. But, the source of these exosomes, where they're coming from, what donor tissues they're coming from,
what are the genetics
is still highly variable, and there's not a lot of data to support it either way as far as the safety that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I think, so I'm a geneticist that's what my doctorate's in. And one of the things you learn very early on in your training as a cell biologist or a geneticist or anything in that vein is that humans have genes that have little sections in there that the body takes out and mix and matches and stuff, as well as differences in sequence. It's why we have the differences that we do. Sometimes the differences are good, sometimes the differences are bad, but we have what's called splice variants, and so there's different splice variants that you can put certain genes in certain configurations, and the body uses that to its advantage because you can have the same gene expressed and have two different functions in a way because of a splice variant. And what people don't understand is that when they talk about things like growth factors or exosomes and stuff, and they use it in this blanket statement, it speaks a little bit to their lack of knowledge and makes me wonder, should you be messing with something you don't quite understand yourself? That's my feeling when I hear people talk about exosomes, especially like I've seen like plant exosomes, and I'm like, tell me why it's a good idea. I'm seriously curious. Tell me, what data do you have? Sure, we've used botanicals for centuries. I like chamomile because the apigenin in it helps me sleep, But the fact is, you're now saying there's these exosomes that are going to make me younger or my hair grow, whatever they're claiming, that come from plants. Tell me why you think that. What cell signal comes from a plant, and how's it going to get into my face,
Yeah. I've never bought onto plant-derived just about anything when it comes to like an injectable.
Sure.
Okay. Were a lot of growth factors. Growth factors are a huge thing in the market forever.
They're still out.
They're still out
They're just
there.
pivoting to exosomes.
Yeah, now they're saying it's
They're
not
reclaiming.
it's
Yeah.
not the growth factor. It was the exosomes
Yeah,
growth factor
yeah.
that caused it. That have worked remarkably well with good patient-reported outcomes. Okay, and with some data behind the growth factor working, but with the plant-derived growth factors, there was a company that's like, this is for like your vegan patients, and I
No,
was
no.
like,
I guess it's
in my head, I think, how does a plant cell communicate
cell.
with a human cell? Like, I mean, we have two different types of energy sources. I mean, it just doesn't, in my mind, make sense.
Well, to be fair, there are things derived from plants that can affect humans. I mean, that's like poison ivy, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
The thing is, there are things that can affect. It's not that it's impossible. It's that you need to tell me why. Like, don't just, what's that, I don't know I'm trying to think of that phrase, but it's like, you can't just try to sell me something and say it works without any type of evidence as to why. Like, why is it better to do that than the stuff that you like?
Right.
Like, why would I buy that? And if they make all these claims, like you said, I'd like to see why you're making those claims. Because frankly, I would hope that we're getting to a place where evidence-based medicine demands that there actually be evidence. And that if I'm going to charge somebody, I don't know, what would you charge somebody for like the product that you sell? Is it like in the hundreds or? It's in the hundreds probably.
Oh,
right?
in the hundreds, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a lot of money for somebody to do on a monthly basis when they can go and get cold cream.
Yeah.
So why should these physicians and extenders feel comfortable recommending that when there's no evidence? Because you've told us it's in a petri dish, which I will tell you, what cells secrete in a petri dish is not the same thing your cells secrete in your body.
Yes.
So the blood is actually the one that is the most, for me, going to be secreting the most normal thing that the body would normally have, especially if it's autologous, like if it's coming from your own body. But other than that, I'd say the jury is still out. Could we find the next cure for cancer from this? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just like, show me the
data. Yeah. And to your point, there's not a lot of data out there. There just isn't. I mean, especially human clinical trials using it, looking at the actual science, the histology behind
what's
it.
inside of the exosome.
What's inside the exosome? How is it affecting the tissues? Most of the published studies that might have had human participants in it was all topical, and it's all patient-reported outcomes.
Yeah.
So
that's not going to answer those questions.
That's not hard science. That's just. And
it's useful for a
it's
marketing
useful,
team.
But I learned this a long time ago in statistics. I had to take statistics 3 times, not because I'm stupid, just because it never transferred from my associate's degree to my bachelor's degree to my master's
and he's
degree.
sticking to that story.
I hate statistics, and
I'm
so happy now that I have a statistician that I hire to deal with the numbers. But we know, and that you can make anything statistically significant.
You can try.
You can try.
Now, whether you convince people is different.
But, I tell this joke. It's like, if I wanted to make the claim mayonnaise makes your skin look better, I could enroll 50 patients, have them put mayonnaise on their face every night. And at 30 days, if I didn't get the statistical significance I needed, because not enough people said their skin looked better with mayo, I would just increase my sample size. Okay. Eventually, you could get enough people that outweigh the people that say it doesn't work, right?
You could cook the books.
You could cook the books. And some of these studies out there cook the books. So you just have to use better clinical judgment and rely on all the data that's available out there, not just on what someone's, sliding across the table and saying this is the best product just because I'm the one selling it.
Well, what I would say is I agree with everything you said, but we need to, because I was on a panel not too long ago of people that were talking about this very subject, and the last person that asked, we were at the end of the conversation, the last person spoke up was like, okay, so what do we do about it? It's like, because the fact is, we spend a lot of money on our clinical group doing clinical work, in our R&D group doing R&D work, but the fact is, a lot of companies are going to market without doing any of that. And so why is it that we're going to spend millions of dollars when they're spending zero, and then they're going to get more sales than us? So that's the conundrum. How do we hold our industry to a higher level when there's the bad players that are making it to where people like me have a hard time convincing our board of directors to give me $1 million to do a study, or to go to work with somebody like you to do a study, because you don't come free.
No.
And so if I'm gonna involve a physician or a nurse or anything, I have to pay them,
Right.
Because they have to live too. If
Yeah.
they're going to do clinical research, and it takes time away from their practice. So what do we do? I mean, I know you probably don't have the answer, because it seems like nobody does. But until physicians and their extenders demand that higher level, it's going to be hard for us to justify investing in that.
I think what it boils down to, Thomas, it comes from a provider perspective, taking responsibility to ask the right questions of these companies and ensure patient safety, number one, but ensure also that when they spend the money, they're getting what they're paying for.
Yeah.
And then it's a responsibility secondfold, and I'd like you to kind of, what would a provider questions they would ask that particular company. And then it's consumer responsibility as well. Before you just accept anything as what you should be do, ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And what would be the questions that, let's start with, a provider would ask a company?
So from my perspective, if a company comes into my office, I want to know where their exosomes are sourced from, why did they choose that source, what data supports that source in their viability of what they're trying to sell me it for. Okay, and that would be the first of few questions. And then I would ask, what data have they provided into the world to actually prove or promote their claims? I tend to only work with companies that spend a fair amount of their profit putting it back into research and development. You know that. So I think it's important for providers to just, say, stop, really show me how this actually works. And just by going by the first three questions I listed, 99% of the exosome companies will not have an answer for you. Okay.
They'll start backing up.
They'll start backing up at that point.
Most of them choose the type based on whatever's available.
Yeah.
They don't have a reason.
And I hate to be the Debbie Downer here, but unfortunately, I don't think a giant safety spotlight will be put on exosomes until something really bad happens.
Yeah.
We hope doesn't, but
Because unfortunately, in aesthetics, a lot of it's reactive than it is proactive.
Right.
So again, that's why, I do offer an exosome product in my clinic. It is a topical. I feel like it's safe based on the science and the data that I've worked with the Mayo Clinic to assess it at. That's why I'm confident in that product. I have yet to have an injectable company or an injectable form of exosomes walk through my door that has been able to provide me with the data that makes me feel like it's safe or appropriate for patient treatment.
There's also a certain level of data that gives you confidence that patients are going to get some level of result. Whether it's more than they could get from something else, unknown.
Don't know.
But there's some level of information there. And to be fair, there is a lot of anecdotal information that providers make decisions on, is more so than a consensus in the scientific data is anecdotally what are they experiencing. So the consumer, the patient walks into a practice, maybe not yours, let's not say yours, but any practice, a medical aesthetic practice in the U.S., and they are hearing a really great story around exosomes. What questions in that moment should they ask?
that's a tough one because they don't know to ask, probably, most of them.
Yeah, they don't know. Like I had a patient that's coming in for microneedling in a couple weeks. He's been a long time patient of mine, and he's like, "Oh, I want to add exosomes to it."
They've heard the buzz.
I said, "Why?"
Great question. Yeah.
Why do you want to add exosomes? Well, I hear it's better. Well, who told you it was better?
The company's telling you.
I see it on Instagram, and I'm like, well, just because you see it on Instagram doesn't mean it's a thing,
right?
And a lot of times when adding treatments together, I would much rather use like a PRP or something like that, which I've done for years. I know it's safe. I know the results are reproducible, etc. Than just trying something new. Again, I don't want to be the provider on the news that something bad has happened. with exosomes. So I'm still very, very cautious with it. Now, from a consumer perspective, what are the right questions to ask? The sad part is if you go into a clinic and they're offering injectable exosomes, they're probably not going to have the answers to any questions you have to ask.
Or answer them wrong.
Or they're not going to have the knowledge,
Yeah.
or because truly some of these providers don't know what they don't know. And,
Right.
So it makes it difficult. They're just trying to make sure that they keep up with what's hot.
Right.
What
So
the
you get more
patient is
business.
asking
Bringing
for.
patients in because
Yeah.
it's a business thing. It doesn't mean it's a sound business decision. I don't know. That's why I don't inject them in my clinic. So it's hard for me to answer
Right,
it
right.
I
truthfully.
think one of the things I love about the medical aesthetic industry, and I've always said this, is why does a patient choose? Sometimes it means going to a professional building and going, parking in a parking garage, going up several levels. It's not pulling up in front of an establishment and walking in and grabbing a little product and coming out. It takes sometimes more effort to get into an established medical aesthetic practice. It might take a little longer. You might spend a little more, but you're relying on the expertise of that medical aesthetic professional to make the best, first of all, the safest decisions for you, but to get what you're paying for, to get the result that you walked into that clinic to get. So, you would hope that everyone would be of that standard in our industry and be that for those patients who are making that effort and spending that money to go into a medical aesthetic practice.
And I truly hope, I want science to push this forward. So I hope there are companies that are willing to put the dollars in R&D to see if this is actually working, if it's keeping patients safe, if it's doing what we promise it's doing. And if we do this podcast 3 years from now, hopefully I can eat crow and be like, I was completely wrong. Exosomes are the best thing since sliced bread.
Right.
Completely changed the industry. But right now the data doesn't support it.
No.
So
You're going to sit
in
back
my
and-
sound clinical judgment, I'm going to sit back and fortunately
and
watch a
wait.
bunch of other people
Yeah. Well, there's so many great options
take
out there.
the risk that I'm not willing to. So.
There's so many great options in our industry that you don't have to follow the buzzword on, TikTok that patients are coming in and asking for, that you're able in that moment. I love that. Why?
Yeah.
What makes you suggest that? Let me tell you from my medical professional background that here's a better choice for you.
Yeah.
Here's the why of that choice.
Unfortunately, there's trends that come and go. Some of them are safe, some of them are not. I remember a physician that did this thing on one of these shows about do-it-yourself skincare, and she was making like papaya and avocado. And I'm like, do you understand that somebody could hurt themselves seriously with the toxins and stuff that grow in these foods, and that there's enzymes in papaya that actually could burn your skin? And it's like there are things that even physicians say sometimes that they shouldn't, and then they realize it, and then they change it. But because things get trendy and people want to be part of the trend, and so we have to be careful. That's I'm completely the opposite of. I'm always I go by the beat of my own drum, and it usually is to my deficit. But the fact is that sometimes being more skeptical, asking more questions is going to lead you in the right direction. It could be irritating to people. I'm sure that you get irritated when somebody asks too many questions and you're just like, just take my word for it. I went to school for this.
Yeah.
But it is, like you said, it's their health, right?
Yeah,
And their
all of
money.
us.
So
Yeah.
that's a balance, though. And you don't want the client that's going to doubt everything you say. But at the same time, you want them to at least push a little bit, maybe. Anyhow,
Advocate.
Yeah,
Just advocate for themselves.
It's our health, so we got to advocate for ourselves. That's all we have time for today. So, David, if they want to find you on social media, where can they find you?
Yep. So I'm on social media under Ultimate Skin Source. That's all one word, Ultimate Skin Source.
And it's on Facebook and Instagram. And you guys should check it out because sometimes he puts little blurbs of lectures and stuff that he does. I'm not sure what else you put on there, but there was one time you did like a 300-step skincare routine, but I think it was because you were showing all your products or something.
It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. I was Aspen Cosmetic Boot Camp. It was like when I'm in Colorado, I have to add a couple more things to my skin because my skin is like leather because of the altitude. But in general, it's like if it's more than 2 to 4 steps, it's too much.
Yeah, there was a little clown car happening on your toiletry station.
Yes.
But I thought it was just because you were showing the different textures and stuff.
Yeah.
But I just was giving you grief about that. But anyhow, Angela, where can they find you?
Well, I'm just going to say, interestingly enough, I was at the same conference in Aspen, David, and I didn't have to change my routine whatsoever.
Oh,
because
no,
my
not at all.
microbiome is balanced.
What is that
and so, Yeah, I'm saying that kidding, but it's actually the
Yeah,
truth. It
yeah.
was exciting to go into a really dry climate and come back and go, wait a minute, I didn't experience
Yeah.
what I used to experience because my microbiome is balanced.
Your skin biome is
my
balanced,
skin
yes.
biome is balanced. So at Angela Wilson McDonald on Instagram is where they can find me.
Okay, and you probably will not come back after you see all 3 posts and have nothing else to look at. I'm just kidding. So you can find me at dr.t.hitchcock on Instagram. It's about all I have, other than like LinkedIn, which you don't want to go to. It's boring. But you can also go to crownlaboratories.com. And if you go to the medical affairs section, we have a plethora of videos. We did Beauty and the Bacteria series. We have webinars and educational things. Also, pick up a copy of Rebooting the Biome, which is the book that I just wrote with my colleague, Dr. Doris Day. And I think it's a good read. But of course, I'm biased. So
It is a very good read.
But anyways, we hope that you gleaned something from this conversation. Thank you for your eyes and your ears. And until next time, we'll see you later. Goodbye for now.